WATESOL session today, our second session for this year. So this is how the session will run today. I'll just introduce you before we introduce Breda, which Elizabeth is going to do. But this is Anna Darling is the main host of this today, and so she'll be checking the chat room. So if you have any comments or any issues, do send a message in the chat room to Anna. And then Elizabeth Rothwell will introduce Breda, and then Breda will begin to talk. And probably, Breda, there might be some time at the end for questions. Is that how you'd like to do it?
Yep, that would be great. But I'm happy for people to stop me at any point and ask.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much. All right, over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. And it's a real privilege today to introduce Breda. I'm going to read from the bio data information we've all been sent first, and then I'm just going to expand on it a little bit.
It's going to tell the truth.
Yes, yes. So it says here, Breda has worked in the English as an additional language in EL field in a range of areas. I think that would be an understatement. A huge range of areas might be better. She's taught at secondary level and on pre-tertiary foundation courses, developed assessment and learning resources for both Ministry of Education and NZQA. She's a member of the Tesselans Executive and is active in the ESOL community locally and nationally. Breda is currently the secondary facilitator of ESOL Online and owner of the English Language Resource Centre, and thank God for that. Breda has a particular interest in assessment at secondary and post-secondary levels. What the bio doesn't tell you is just how generous Breda is with her time, her wealth and depth of experience, her skill, her guidance, and her wise words. Well, how can I say these things? 20 years ago, I arrived here in New Zealand, fresh off the boat, and I went for a job interview. I thought it was a job that was going to be 2 hours a day, something like that. Breda was on the interview panel, and before the hour was up, I was told I had the job. Let's face it, they were desperate and they needed someone with a pulse. But that 1 hour actually changed my life. I was so fortunate to be mentored by Breda, to see firsthand how an expert operated and still operates, and how we can all strive to do more for our students. Because strangely enough, when we do more for our students, they do more for us. Funny how that works. Breda somehow managed to juggle family life, teaching at the local secondary school, Maharangi College, where we both were, writing resources for NZQA, TKI, flying around the country, working on panels, looking at the standard changes, developing online resources and courses, and advocating for us and our students. And this thing about writing online courses, you need to know that when I met Breda, she could only think with a pencil in her hand, pencil in one hand and a piece of paper in front of her. And after every single lesson, she would be scribbling something down. She'd be changing the lesson or adapting it, always improving. And she'd said to me sometimes, Elizabeth, I can't find my pencil. Where is it? I can't think without my pencil. And so when the panel, when here at Tesselans, we were thinking about who could we possibly ask to deliver this broad subject, it just had to be Breda. It just had to be you, Breda, because you are an inspiration to us all. You've gone from somebody that had to think with a pencil in their hand to writing online courses, and you have done so much for us, for our profession, and for our students. You made it look all so effortless, and you even managed to go skiing every weekend in the winter. Although the emails that sometimes were sent out at 3 o'clock in the morning, I think told a slightly different story. Wherever you go, Breda, you just share your expertise so generously. And that is why we are so thrilled to have you here today, and why I personally am so delighted to be able to introduce you, Breda Matthews, for our WATESOL meeting tonight. All over to you, Breda.
Oh, thank you. That's very fulsome and not entirely truthful, except for the pencil bit. When I actually left Maharangi College, Elizabeth presented me with 2 pencils. I had admit that I still use pencils to think, as opposed to going straight into the online. So I'm going to share my screen, and there is a link at the end of the PowerPoint for you to access the PowerPoint today. So here we go. Can we all see that? So how blended learning can assist you to multi-level your classes. Now, I'm not going to do a trot through all of the available tools. I mean, we all have our favourite tools. New tools are always coming out. People like Annette Bartha at Nelson is an absolute expert in a whole range of different tools. What I'm going to focus on today is actually how you can make a coherent course that can be accessed by students in your classroom and students who are at home for whatever reason. So how you can get a whole composite program. If you really do want to find out about lots of different tools, I would recommend having a look at this chap, Russell Stannard. He's based in the UK, but he does great videos, as you can see, on all sorts of things where you can use online tools, Google Docs and Zoom 2021 and free games. So absolutely great. Russell Stannard, can't recommend him enough. Okay, so, and I'm in the wrong PowerPoint. That will show you how non-techie I am. So, what might a multi-level class look like? In multi-level classes used to be the case that, you might have level 1 and level 2. Increasingly now I'm hearing cases where people have got level 1 English language, as the students working towards level 1 English language unit standards, and students are also working towards university entrance and looking at the EAP standards. And occasionally you've got 1 or 2 ducklings down the back who are completely new to English. And so you're going to have a lot more differentiation in your class. Now, those of you who are lucky to have trained in the primary sector, that's your bread and butter, because you have always worked with little reading groups and maths groups and students moving between those groups. So as secondary teachers, we have to take on more of that. You have to have more scaffolding. So you have to have a common topic or a common theme, but you have to scaffold it up and reduce the scaffolding for other groups. Long gone are the days, and I think that applies to not just English language learning and teaching, but to all classes where we expect to present one level of work and everybody in the class to be able to access that. That's simply not the case anymore. We will be, because it's differentiated and because there is scaffolding, that naturally leads to more group work. And I think it also leads to more independent work, because if you're going to work with a small group of students in one section of your room or in a breakout room or wherever it is you're working, the other students have to have purposeful, independent work that's not going to actually overload you with piles and piles and piles of marking at the end of the day. So you have to think very carefully about those 4 things: differentiation, scaffolding, group work, and independent work. Tasks that you give those students in their groups have to have really purposeful learning opportunities for all learners. If it's just busy work, if they see it as just more worksheets, if they see it as the equivalent of colouring in the margins, they won't engage, and you're losing an opportunity for them to learn. So these worksheets, or not worksheets, the tasks you give them have to provide multiple authentic opportunities for learning. And if they're reinforcing the key learning points, and I always remember Dorothy Brown used to say, and lots of you will remember Dorothy Brown, repetition without boring. And I still think that that's really key. Students need multiple opportunities to see and hear and use the language in all its forms. I remember Rod Ellis giving a talk one year, and his talk was entitled, "Why Don't Students Learn What I've Taught?" And he was right. We don't give them enough opportunities to see, hear and use the language. And online tools are a great way for us to provide that. Now, having said all of those things, that we must do these things, I actually do think there's limits. Your principal in your school might very well say, well, you know, the French class is multi-leveled, by which they mean that they've actually got, you know, level 1, level 2 and level 3 NCEA. But often what we're being asked to do is put everybody from kindergarten to university entrance in the same room. And there really are limits to what you can do effectively. And I know that these things cause huge stress for teachers. We worry that we're not serving the needs of either group. So what can you do? You can get a teacher aid. You can buy an online program. You can create your own multi-level program. But I do think you need to be realistic about what you can achieve in available time. I see some of the things that teachers are doing, and Gwenna, who's here today, is one of them. I mean, the hours and hours and hours that go into creating a coherent, comprehensive program is absolutely massive. And I always think, you know, one manageable change. We've got lives, we've got families, we've got partners and husbands, we've got things we want to do other than teach, and you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to be a whole person as well. I often used to say to new teachers in the classroom, the best resource for your student is you, not the worksheet or whatever it is you're going to produce. Okay, so what is available out there? Right, first thing is your planning. You have to plan your program to actually allow that work with small groups and individuals. That might at times be conferencing, but it might be grouping your students. Now, how can you group your students? Well, there's actually a multiple of ways. Sometimes you might want to group students so that they're working with people in the same language group so that they can process the concepts and the ideas and start those initial discussions. Sometimes what you might want to do is foster speaking in English, in which case you'd have multi-language groups. Other times you might want to group your students so you've got students of the same ability together so that you can specifically work with those. There might be other times where you want some co-construction to happen and you might have weaker learners and stronger learners. There is no one way of grouping that is the way to do it. There is the way that matches your learners' needs at that point in time. I think for the independent work, very often it's good to have a similar level because then you can give them all that work, but you don't always have to do that. Units of work need to contain individualised materials that meet student needs. And you have to have parts of your programme that allow time for independent work so that you can use that time to go and work with small groups. So you can say, right, we're all going to do reading now, and I'm going to take this little group over here and extend the writing. Or I'm going to take this little group here and I'm going to give them some additional support. But everybody else has something purposeful that they know that you're going to look at. I'm not going to say mark. I'm not a big fan of the red pen. It takes up too much of your time. But some purposeful work. Okay. Independent work needs to be individualised and linked to current learning. If it's completely irrelevant and off topic, why are they going to do it? It must allow them to work relatively independently. It's no good if they're going to be constantly putting out, Miss, what does this mean? Miss, where's that? Miss, I don't understand this, because then you won't be able to work with your other little small group. It should have a measurable outcome. And for you, it has to be easy to manage. It can't generate mountains and mountains of marking that you have to do. Okay. So you then have to look at your program. What can be done independently? And the first things that always come to mind for me are vocabulary learning, because that time on task for vocabulary learning and the wide reading, those are obvious parts. There are some other parts as well. Then you have to think, do you want to create your own program for which you need muscles and time? Or do you want to buy a program? And for that, you need dollars. And how will your students know what to do? So I'm going to show you two examples where I've worked with students. This has come from a school that I worked with. Now, the school was not in my area, but it was where I supported the teachers. And we worked with Google Docs. And so they had a wee document like this. And I'm just going to bring up the actual document. Okay, here we go. And so all the students had this document. And so they knew that this is where they linked to, they were beginners, these or very low level, ELP level 1 and below. This is where they linked to their RAS reading. This is where they linked to Spelling City for their vocabulary. This is where they linked to subject support. This was some work for new students. Some students did the Learning Village, and they had advanced reading in Newzilla for the stronger learners. Now, Newzilla has now gone to a paid subscription, so you will see that this is quite some time ago. The more advanced, more learning and more help section actually had the academic word list, groups 1 to 6, sublist 1 this was, and we added to it as the year. So there was some, you can see it's already beginning to be differentiated. We had easy reading for RAS kids. We had Newzilla reading for the more advanced students. We had academic word lists for some students, but we had some students here who were using Dolch sight words. They all had a writing document that they could get to from here, and then they had their modules of work. And so, for example, they could go here and they'd work through this with their teacher aid. And there was a lesson PowerPoint, and then there was the actual some additional online activities that they could do. I'm always a fan of, if you use a PowerPoint for a lesson, making it available for the students so that they can go back and look at these PowerPoints. So this one was on countries. There were other ones. For example, this one was on recounts. And the PowerPoints are there, and there were some games that were related to these. So they could go into their PowerPoint. This is what they did with the teacher aid. And in this particular one, they were reading, and it was turned into disappearing clothes. And then eventually there were a little game, and then they would have their own slides that they would do. So this is the work that they would do with the teacher aid. And they were having to sequence these. So these are all happening in Google Slides, and they had to match. There we go. They had to move these along. So there we go. Maybe it was up here, I don't know. Okay. So that was one way of working, but you can see there were games then that were picking up, for example, irregular past tense verbs, or games to do with the vocabulary. Now, I also did something similar with actually students at Massey University. And so students all had their own writing documents that we worked in. And strangely, this is how I checked their, sorry, I'm going back to the student links here, and I'm going to take you to, let's go to Carmen's writing. And the other thing they had to do in their writing documents was they had to read a text, give me the name of the text, and put in here what it was going to be about. Now, I did a similar thing with the students at Massey, and if they had or hadn't done their writing, I used to put this up on the board, and I used to put the angry face. And it was surprising with these students that were sometimes as old as 30. They'd come in the break and they'd say, I've done my reading now, could you take the angry face away? And it was quite extraordinary. I had never expected that. But here I gave them some additional text. These were our topics that particular semester. We were doing education and culture. So I made, in Newzilla, little groups of texts that that were all based on the topic. And the thing with Newzilla was that you could level the text or the students could choose the level of text that was working for them. I linked other games and activities here that they wanted to, that might support them. Then I also would have the PowerPoints that we were going to use that week. And so, again, if the student was absent or if the student was learning from another spot, they could go in and they could see what we were doing. Now, these days, we're getting a bit cleverer, aren't we? We're uploading videos to our Google Classrooms and everything else. But back here, this is what I was doing. And they knew that they did speed reading, and they knew that they had to read the text and score it. And here was then the work that we were doing. They also had their Google Docs, so that wherever I was, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I like skiing, I didn't have to take their paper books or whatever else home with me. Their work was always in their Google Doc. So you can see there's a draft essay here. I had a colour code. So I used to just colour code it for punctuation, grammar, missing words, spelling, delete, if it was a wrong word. And if it was something that I felt that was beyond what we were teaching, then I would put a comment in the corner. So you can see an example here. And they also had to keep a reading log. And that's what that homework was based on. So they had to tell me the title, the main idea, and some supporting detail. Whereas the younger learners were writing just, this book is about, and something that I learnt was. Okay. So back to our main PowerPoint. So I use Google Docs, but other people use the Microsoft OneDrive. The key thing is that the students know what they have to do and they know where the work is, and they can proceed through that work without having to constantly come back to you. Now, I think vocabulary learning can be done quite independently. And again, you have to think, do you want to create your own program or buy a program? Do you want it to be paper-based, or do you want it to be online? Now, Elizabeth and I run a rather nice system at Maharanga where we use D books because back in the day you had the D publications. They're great, great books. And then on Friday, the students would come in and they'd mark their homework themselves, and then they'd do the test, which they would mark themselves. And that reduced my marking load, and it made Friday quite nice. But when you're choosing how they're going to do the vocabulary learning, you're going to have to think quite carefully about whether your learners need text-based definitions or not. Because if your students are actually learning the first couple of hundred words, the definitions, and this is a definition that's come straight off Quizlet for the first 50 words of used to point to something already mentioned, it's not going to make any sense to them. So at those lower levels, you're going to want to look at something like Spelling City, which is a paid program, or this is a program I work with. It's called the Learning Village. And here you can see it's image-based. And with this particular program, the students can listen by clicking on the ear. They can record, and then they can play back the recording. They can remove the words, and again, they can listen, and then they can write, and then they can put back words in, and they can compare. So, at a lot, depending on where your students are, students working at the academic word list can work quite nicely with something like Quizlet or Kahoot or Memrise. Very low levels, you're probably going to look more towards Spelling City. So here, I've got some suggestions. Here's the D publications, the link to D publications. There are vocabulary exercises on WATESOL Online. If you want to go to online resources, there's Quizlet and Memrise. You can access ready-made from word zero right the way through on Quizlet and Memrise. That are quite good. And that link will get you the Spelling City, there's the Learning Village, and then there are various vocabulary tests. But I'd really emphasise, don't do something that's going to generate lots and lots of marking for you. I mean, Elizabeth will maybe pop into the chat whether self-marking worked. People would have different views on that. And we definitely had one student, Elizabeth might recall, who actually cheated when he self-marked. But I didn't worry, because actually he was noticing. He was noticing the difference between what his answer was and what the correct answer was. And the correct answer was, and that was just another opportunity for learning. So I thought, okay, go with that, especially if I didn't have to mark anything. Okay, reading is another area where you can very nicely generate some independent work. Again, it's the same questions. Paper-based or online, create your own or buy. And here are some options. There are graded readers, and most schools have got graded readers, and students write reading logs. I would encourage you not to mark every word that's written in a reading log. You could select some. You could have a conference. The nice thing about doing those reading logs is you can then select the best to submit for a unit standards assessment, if that's what you want to do. And it really, they go right down to a low level and right up. So that's quite good. There's a new resource come out called Front Foot English, and they have got some very nice high interest readers. So I think they're worth looking at, and they're quite reasonably priced at the moment. I think, and they come with worksheets and all sorts of things. There's also online. There's an instructional series on literacy online and the specific dual language books. I've put a link to the booklet, our online document, Online Tools for Teachers, where you can find more reading programs. But some of the ones that I'm most familiar with are ReadWorks and Read Theory. They're free. Newsella was free. It isn't free anymore. There's the RAS Kids Reading and Learning A to Z. And that's a paid component. And then there's the Learning Village, where the reading is incorporated into quite a holistic program. But once again, I am involved in that, so conflict of interest there. Okay, these are the sorts of reading logs that I would ask students to write. So I give them a prompt, and they just put the date, the title of the book, and they'd write a couple of sentences at the lower level. And all I would have to do is see if they had done it or they hadn't done it, really. I didn't do much more than that. These are my seniors. Where you can see I was using my happy and unhappy faces about whether they'd done it. And you can see these texts were related. We were studying transport options in town. And so this is about e-scooters. So I was finding them using Newsella at that time, finding them texts related to the topic that we were studying. They were not random text. From anywhere, though they were able to choose a text themselves to read each week. Okay. One of the big issues, I think, is assessment. What am I going to assess? And the one thing that I would say is not everything needs to be assessed summatively. Just because you've taught it doesn't mean that you have to assess it. We can over-assess. We can try and do a speaking, a reading, a writing, and a listening assessment every term. And I think that's, and I think that's over-assessment for the students. I think you're possibly assessing them before they're ready. By the end of term 3, they're probably going to be at a much higher level anyway. So try and space your assessments out. So, for example, presentations can be assessed from level 1 foundation right up to level 4 EAP. But the presentations, you then don't have to have a listening if you're assessing the presentations. You could link that to formative listening tasks so that they're listening to each other's presentations at the appropriate level, and they're answering some quite basic questions about those. And then next term, you would do the listening. So just think carefully about layering your assessments. In order to manage your classes, I think you've got to choose, particularly if you've got a range in the same class, you've got to choose topics that can be multi-level and used with a range of students in your class. Now, some topics are easier to level up and down than others. I think globalization has got some pretty tough concepts to teach to very low-level beginners. Climate change also probably, but descriptions of people, you could write a description of people, from, I'm going to talk to my partner here and then I'm going to write about their lives, to writing, an autobiography of Meng Fu. So that can be stretched, and so can writing about disasters. And those of you that have used my assessments, that there's a range of assessments on, for example, Tangiwai at level 1, level 2 and level 3. So look for topics that can be scaled up or scaled down for your students. Choose topics that will provide opportunities for teaching as well as assessment across a range of skills. So I have occasionally come across teachers who think that they have to do this topic for speaking, and then they go along and they have to do a completely different topic for listening, and then they do a third topic for reading, and a fourth. The cognitive burden of all of that language for the students is absolutely huge. So, sometimes, in the words of John Key, though we won't agree necessarily with his spending budgets for schools, do more with less. But think about the topic. Can you get a speaking, a listening and a reading and writing for that? And because you've had the input, you're doing the speaking and you're doing the listening and you're doing the listening and the reading first probably, that will improve their writing because now they understand the concepts. Now they understand the vocabulary. Now they've already been exposed to the collocations, and their writing and speaking is likely to be that much better. But it doesn't mean, even if you've got your topic, disasters or global warming or whatever it is you're doing, doesn't mean that every one of those assessments needs to be formative. You could choose one of them to be the summative one that time. Sorry, they don't all need to be summative. So balance that out. The other thing, if you're choosing a topic, is to think, are there enough texts on those topics that they can read or listen to? And are there enough opportunities to speak and write about those topics? And is the topic wide enough, not just for formative and summative assessment, but what about if there's reassessment? And that's why I tend to choose topics like writing about people or disasters, because if they interview another student, so they're listening and they're speaking, and then they write about that student, and it doesn't meet the grade, it just misses it by a little way, you've got the opportunity for them to interview somebody else and and you haven't had to do any additional preparation in order for that to happen. And that's really important. The same with writing about animals. And I know we tend to think, oh God, animals again. But in fact, students are often quite interested, and they often relish the opportunity to write about an animal that's important in their home country or their culture, and to teach us something about it. So they can always write about another one. So you have to think about the learning burden for them, and you have to think about the preparation burden for you. Okay. Integrate your topics, as I said. Often the first topic that I would do in a school at the beginning of the year, I want to get to know the students. I want them to get to know each other. So we do speaking and listening. The students would interview each other. The students would read description of people and biographies, and then the students would use their interviews to complete forms at the very basic level and write descriptions or biographies. So integrate them, but remember, you're not trying to assess everything summatively. Assessment opportunities might include, for speaking, you could do a presentation. Even at level 1 foundation, they can bring in a picture. This is my family. My mum is called. My dad is called. I have 3 brothers and sisters. We live in, that's a level 1 sort of level, up to much higher levels. You could listen to spoken information. They could read. There could be wide reading and there could be close reading, that descriptions of people. They can fill in forms, and they can do and they can write descriptions. Now, how many people know the NZ-CEL guiding documents? Do you want to just put your hand up or raise your hand? Okay, so this is actually designed for tertiary providers who use the NZ-CEL, but it's very useful for those of us who are in schools. So it's easily downloadable. That's the link to download it. It has lots of information in there early on about, some of those tricky things that prop up in unit standards. What's exactly the difference between supporting detail and specific information? It's all explained in this document, so it's really, really useful. But on page 32 onwards, you can see it tells you what the assessment opportunities are. So in general, over here we've got the normal information texts. Here we've got the practical texts. And here we've got the wide reading. So you can see over here that you can do read and understand words and phrases, read and understand simple text in everyday context, straightforward text on the familiar topic, a level 3 GPO, and then the 4. And if you go down here, then you've got the level 4 academic. Okay, so those are the EAP subjects. They're here. So you can see very easily from this document how you can scaffold this across the different assessment opportunities for students. Okay, so it does the reading, it does the writing, it does speaking and listening. So it's a really, really useful document. And as I said, it also has some of those definitions earlier on in the document that you might find useful when you're trying to unpick what a unit standard actually means. Yeah, there we go. There we go. This is the main idea. This is how specific information differs from supporting details. This is what predictable means. So it's a really, really good document to get your hands on. Okay, so as I've said before, you can use independent work for assessment. So these are the online reading logs that my students did. That's a perfectly acceptable response. The student has definitely read it. They've responded to the text. If you really do need to verify authenticity, you can use a short student conference. You could even turn that into an interview that then could be an assessment. So this is quite basic. You can see one new thing I learned was that different ants in the nest have different jobs. There's a personal response. They've hit the mark. This is, these students were studying inequality, obviously at a much higher level. So this article is about how poverty influences brain development. According to some research in the text, children whose families are poor may have less grey matters. We've got a grammar error. It doesn't matter. They've understood the text. They've engaged with the text because they always live in the stressful and unsafe environments and eat unhealthy diet. The author also states that researchers want to find efficient ways to change the negative impacts caused by poverty on children. It's patently a student who's read, understood, and engaged with the text. You could use that for a wide reading assessment. What ministry resources are available for new learners? ESOL Online has units of work. There are also materials in the Teachers Resource Exchange. There are the ELIT resources, including the focus on English, bamboo, flax and microbes. Those are they look quite old-fashioned now, but they are available and they can be adapted. And that's where you can find the PowerPoint. So now we have a bit of time for questions. I think everybody's on mute at the moment. Is there anything people would like to see more, or are there any questions that they would like to ask? Anna, are you able to unmute people?
Well, everybody can unmute themselves. I'm pretty sure, or you can put the question in the chat and I can read it. Either's fine. I don't think I can unmute everybody altogether.
Okay. Is there any bit of that you'd like to see more of? Oh, somebody's got a lovely cat.
Those of us, Breda, who teach in the tertiary sector, I think you've touched on some of the resources that we could use. Are there any more that you might recommend?
So there is a document, and I have linked to it further back in the PowerPoint. I'll just share my screen again, and I'll pull it up. So we have a shareware document that teachers add to. So it's here on the PowerPoint, and it's called Online Tools for English Language Learners and Their Teachers. And people have added a vast range of these. And so you can see the complete online program, text analyzers, listening, reading assessments. All of these are links. Bookmark. When somebody's removed my bookmark. So it will take you down to the relevant place. And there's a whole range of tools, and whoever's contributed it, as usually says, has given a little brief description of it. I wonder if it might be worth, because it's I'm on the wrong side, because we've got a couple of minutes, I might just show you an example of a holistic program, which is the Learning Village. So this is really aimed at beginners, but it goes possibly up to, certainly to happily up to L2. Also goes to, would be useful for students who are transitioning. And this is one of the benefits of this program, is that everything is in one spot. There's very little for you to do, and you don't have to mark yourself. So I'm just going to find. I'm going in here. So when students go in and use this program, and there's a version over here for younger learners and a version over here for older learners, it's game-based learning. But this is not so tertiary focused, but the other document has got a whole range of tools. So when students go in here, they've got an island. They get to make friends as they go around. There are reading comprehensions that they do every time they meet a friend. The main learning is in here. So it starts right down at a very low level. This is the survival language. It goes up to expressing habits, present perfect, connecting. If you want to switch, you can go to the phonics. So for those people in primary schools where they're using the structured literacy approach, then it teaches all the sounds and it does segmenting and blending. But it goes up to the 2,000 word. Then there's the curriculum content. I'm just going to move that. So it's grouped into areas. But all of the learning takes place like this. So I'm just going to find electricity. Often in schools they do circuits, so we'll look at circuits. And what the students get is a learn page. But all of these will self-mark. That's what I like. So you can reduce the number. They listen.
This is a circuit.
This is a circuit. They record. This is a circuit. And then they listen back. This is a circuit. You can take the text out and they can listen and record again. They play the games. This is a circuit. Gosh, is it that one?
This is a battery.
So that this time it's text.
This is a battery.
If they get it wrong, they're given the right answer.
This is a short. This is a bowl.
Now they have to Okay, so there's a memory game, there's multiplayer games, there's all these different games that the students play. When they finish, they make a friend, and they'll end up getting a text that they have to read. So this is a fluency text. So they have to listen to that and they have to record it. Then
Hello, my name is Suchitra. I love chocolate.
So they have
My
to
favourite is milk chocolate. I have a lot of chocolate in my cupboard. I have dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and light chocolate. Do you have any chocolate?
Okay, and it's going to tell me that I got it wrong because I just did it quite quickly. But from a teacher perspective, it is engaging. It is for all the students. From the teacher's perspective, what I like is, she says, looking for it. All of the results are there. It will store 5,000 results for each learner.
5,000.
So you can really, really break it down and see how much progress they've done. And I haven't had to mark anything.
Oh,
and that, for me, it will tell me how long they've been using it. It will tell me what progress they've made over the curriculum content of the whole thing. I can dig down and get more detail. I can actually see what they did in every single lesson. So this student has done this lesson. Not only do I know that when she started on the pre-test, she got 67, and then she got 100. I can actually say how she engaged with that. So I know there is a legend here, but I know that she did the assessment. She said the assessment was hard. She went to the Learn page. She played 2 games. And then she did the assessment and she got 100% and made increased a progress of plus 33. So just
Breda,
yes.
Can I interrupt, please?
Yes.
My name's Fiona. Wow, this is amazing what you've prepared for us, or for me, and you've guided us to see what's important, this engagement, and make it easier for us. What you've just demonstrated, that last one, it made me think, okay, there's several things going on here. Those students are able to use a computer and self-manage, right? They're doing independent learning with your guidance and using that learning village system. And so I was saying, what level were those students?
So we have students coming into the country now with 0 English who are using that. I will say, unlike myself, talking to somebody the other day, and they said, "Oh, you just click and see." And I'm not that generation. I am not one of the clickerati. I want to know what that button's going to do before I click it. But the children are, and they can't break it. And so there are 7-year-olds. Well, we are working at the moment with 7-year-olds who have no English language, who are happily going in and using that system.
Wow.
I know.
So they've got cognitive flexibility. I teach adults who could be up to 70 years old who've never touched technology. So I don't know how they'll do that. What I'm going to say, I think another lead-on question, if I may, is do you ever interact with these students face-to-face or, hands-on rather than just online? I'm not clear about this.
At the moment, I don't. But remember, I showed you those things from where I work with pre-tertiary and in schools, and those students. I worked at Massey University, so yes, we were in class, and I had my Google document up on the display screen, but then they were able to access that. And this is what I mean about multiple opportunities for learning. They didn't have to just retain what I told them in the class. They could go back and review it. They could look at it again. They could see it multiple times. They could go and read multiple texts about the same topic. And they didn't have to, be busy. I don't want them writing down lots. I want them listening and interacting and talking. And I want them to have the resource to go away and do that additional learning in their own time. And then if we had a student that was absent for any reason, the material was there for them to go back and to see what we did. And I mean, I think we've moved a long way from the time that I'm going to tell you once and you're going to learn it, and then we're going to move on. Because I don't learn like that, especially not if it's a new piece of technology. I need to practice it.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for one or two questions more. Anyone else have a question?
Perhaps somebody'd like to share how they're using technology in their classrooms, or what they're doing in their classrooms that is actually leading to successful multi-levelling. And I can see Ruth Ann's there. I know Ruth Ann will have lots of ideas. So how are you multi-levelling your classes, and what are the challenges?
Again, my main classes are year 7 and 8, so it's not a wide age range. But of course, we've got from beginners to quite, proficient speakers. So again, I learned a lot of what I know from Breda, of course. So
I learned from Ruth Ann.
So we're doing the same sort of thing where you've got a central topic, and then we have multi-leveled type activities from that. So quite often we'll do one experience. So we might watch a video, for example, and then we'll have different activities around that video, so that some students may only be identifying some key vocabulary. So they'll have an activity, like say if we watched a video about conservation in Africa, for example, some of the students may be only identifying some of the animals that they saw and maybe doing a matching activity with the pictures and words, whereas other students may have been given a text that supports conservation in Africa and be going through and getting some key ideas or main ideas out of it. So you can have one group but have lots of different things that they could be doing from that. And of course, I taught online. So a lot of the strategies I was using there, I bring into the classroom as well, both for pre-activities, so giving some students some online activities to do before, so that they've actually maybe had a look at some of the vocabulary, looked at some of the concepts before we come to watch a video or do our discussion or play a game or whatever we're doing to sort of spark interest in the topic. And then again, afterwards, having a range of things that they can go away and do, because my students come out of the classroom and then go back into the classroom. So having some online activities that they can do in their classroom, because most of them are on device, have access to devices in the classroom, gives them things that they can do in the classroom, so they look like what the other students are doing, which is great for them.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think attracted me to the Learning Village, was that you could take a classroom text and you can pop it in, and then it creates a text. I'm just pulling up a piece of text and I'm going to share my screen again. I've just pulled a random piece of text off the Learning Village, off the internet, but I'm going here to something that they call a text builder.
Text builder.
And so I've just put this quite random piece of text in. I want my closed procedure to remove every fifth word. I'm going to just go for the medium frequency and the low frequency words I'm going to take out. And I'm going to do a two-way. So now it's given me a split dictation on the classroom topic.
Wow.
It's given me a vanishing close. So there's the sentence, and then you just fold it over and they do this one, and then you fold it over again and they do the next little bit until they've got none of the text. There's a close procedure. Now, this is where you can take out words or put words back in, and when you go to print it, those little crosses disappear. There's a chunked scramble. There's a speaking frame, and there's the whole text, which is quite nice if you want to do a running dictation or something like that. But that sort of thing is, I guess, what you're talking about, Ruth Ann, where you can support your students with, give them purposeful work that they can do in their mainstream class that's related to the topic with minimum effort from you, because I think we need to be much kinder to ourselves than we often are. We run ourselves ragged.
Oh.
Okay, and I put the link to the PowerPoint in the chat.
Thank you, Breda.
So that
great.
it has that. Anybody else like to share something that they feel really works for them? I know, that was what you were saying, Ruth Ann, was really interesting. That supporting them in the class is really difficult, isn't it?
A few people have said that they have had to go, so just so they've said thank you very much from the.
Okay. Well, I hope that was what you were expecting.
Yes, thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Breda. We're so fortunate, and I can't help but think how lucky those teachers are, I think, in the secondary and primary sector, who have you and your resources to call on. This is amazing.
Thank you.
And the Learning Village, what a wonderful resource that is.
There is now, they've developed, it's just come out, they've developed a community village for adults. So that's teaching them, how to talk to teachers in schools and all of those, critical things. Yeah. So if anybody wants to look at that more, just get in touch with me. I can show it to you. But the community village is really exactly the same principle. And we've trialled it. It's been trialled with one of the schools up here in Auckland with the parents during lockdown. And it was just wonderful to see, because we got some screenshots, 6 and 7 year olds showing their parents how to log in to the Learning Village and what to do. It was just wonderful. Absolutely inspiring.
So do schools have access to the Learning Village? Have schools bought it for their staff?
Yeah, quite a lot of schools have bought it, but there's also some schools who are being subsidised to use it. But those are schools that where they don't have ESOL teachers and they've rarely had English language learners, and so they need some support around that. But yeah, there are some quite big schools that are using it, quite a few in your area in Wellington.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yes.
Well, I think we probably should draw this to a close now, but thank you so much, Breda. What you've presented today just provides us all with just a wealth of ideas.
Yes.
Wealth of ideas and resources that we can just click on, some of them free, which is even better.
Yes.
That is so useful for those of us who are at the coalface and, are looking for something to use tomorrow or next week. Thank you so much. We all know how much time it takes and to put together a presentation, and really appreciate you devoting this time to the WATESOL and the wider ESOL community. So please, everybody, perhaps we'll just do this kind of thank you.
And thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to see people because we've all been so isolated, haven't we? So even on Zoom, thank you very much. And just remember, be kind to yourselves. Less is more sometimes.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful idea.
Okay,
thank you so much, Breda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.